4 minutes, my heart had stopped.
I didn't know if I was going home with my husband or not.
Johne Mccray was dead for 4 minutes.
Let's talk about why this is so impactful for the sport of disc golf and what it means for the future. So it was very much highlighted this past weekend at the Portland Open how much age is not a factor on tour. We certainly may think about it, we may hypothesize that yeah, as you get older, you may be able to compete, but maybe not like that good compared to everyone else. But I think with last week, this is becoming a moot point. With two people over 40 getting a podium finish, I think it is definitely relevant to be talking about how age is not a factor nearly as much in the sport of disc golf. And I truly believe this will fundamentally change the sport of disc golf to be something very different than any other sport. So looking at Johne Mccray, for example, he was 50 years old, had a major heart attack on the course. This heart attack occurred about 5 months ago, but guess what? Johne Mccray does not give up. He's actually won a couple of events since that occurrence, and that puts him at 200 wins lifetime. So it definitely shows that age, and not only that, but actual injuries will not hinder you nearly as much in the sport of disc golf as you might think. And we see people like Ricky, Eagle, Gavin Rathbun, Valerie Manduhanu that have these very serious injuries, and we perceive it as like, oh, this might be a career ender. But with the sport of disc golf, you have so much more time than a sport like basketball or football or baseball, where it's very important that you're at your peak flexibility, reflexes, all of that. But with disc golf, it is much more about form, function, and just focus. And these are not factors that are really all that relevant to age. I mean, yes, it'll deteriorate inevitably as you age, but I think as long as you're consistent with your practice and form and putting, that it'll become much less of a factor. And as we develop new and smoother ways of doing backhand and forehands and trying to work more on a smooth release rather than an extremely powerful release, we can definitely see that these pro players can still have a huge longevity in the sport. And with Johne Mccray, he had 200 wins, 4 of those being a major win. It wasn't the Masters division, so it isn't necessarily a Worlds win, but still extremely impressive nonetheless. Looking at Juliana Korver, obviously she just played phenomenal, probably one of her best rounds ever. And this is like her farewell year where she's like kind of retiring. So that is insane to be 52 years old and get a podium finish. And especially crazy because she has her first championship in 95. Her first Worlds title was about 25 years ago. And then she comes present day, gets a 3rd place finish, and it just goes to show that disc golf has so much more longevity than any other sport. And then if we're talking about longevity, we obviously have to talk about Ohn the Dog Scoggins. She is 42 years old and just doesn't miss. The amount of podium finishes that she has in the last 2 years even is just insane. With a total of 10 podium finishes, 7 of those being 2nd place, she is obviously crushing it on tour, cannot miss a circle 2 putt to save her life, and is really racking up the FPO cash even without a ton of wins. And if you look at all these people's game, it is definitely not about distance. I would not say JK has great distance. I don't think Ohn does. I don't think Johnny does. But they all throw consistent, smooth shots, and they are very dialed on their putter. JK a little bit less so, but she does have a good form when she's feeling confident. And when I'm trying to project where I see this current application existing for the rest of the people on tour, I think this is definitely applicable to people like Paul and Kristen that are definitely aging a little bit, but they certainly have still what it takes to dominate a tournament. And for me, I do not think it's a matter of age that would bring them down. I think it is more so just them being interested in other things, not really wanting to live on the tour forever, because that is a huge drain, and not really having a financial reason to like devote your entire life to the tour. I think that's the bigger reason why they wouldn't do it. But looking at Ohn and Juliana Korver and Johnny as a reference point, I think players like Paul and Kristen could really live out an entire decade still being on that top echelon of the tour. And if you look at any other sport, that is just very rarely the case. And for me as a Chiefs fan, people like Travis Kelce that have been around for a while are just such an anomaly that you just don't really see it much in sports, especially football. So to see this be a much more potentially common situation where people are aging into the disc golf world and they're not actually getting phased out is very exciting. And I think it has a whole lot of implications. If you're trying to sign like a 10-year deal, like Paul, for example, you have a lot more reason to get that kind of contract because you know that you have what it takes to continue to be an elite force on the tour, and you're not just going to fall because you're like 35 or 40. You still have what it takes because age is much less of an important factor when you're trying to be an elite level pro. Now, I do not want to imply that endurance and conditioning are not important. I think that is incredibly important, and it is certainly harder to do that type of stuff when you're older. But assuming that you have the drive, I think it is very, very possible for these players to remain on tour for 15 or 20 years even. And then if you look at the opposite end, where people like Kyle Ahrens are 15 years old, just starting the tour and absolutely crushing it, I think there is a huge possibility for them to be on tour for a literal career, like a lifetime of being on tour, if that is what they desire, because they have the good form, they're starting early, they're kind of becoming Simon-esque, where they know the sport so early on that is much less a factor of figuring out disc golf and more so just getting those reps in and getting a feel for what it's like to be in a high stress situation, because I ultimately believe that is a lot more important to be a success on the tour rather than just doing drives again and again and again. And I think the best example of this is probably Gannon Buhr. He's obviously been playing for a while, but he still looks relatively new. I think if he really gives it his all, he could definitely be on tour till he's like 35 or 40 even. It is really just a matter of, does he want to devote his entire life to disc golf? As of right now, I would say yes, but it is very hard to tell because people are extremely motivated for the current time that they're in. But as years go by, it may not be the case that that is their future drive. We'll just have to see. With that said, what do you guys think? Do you think that as pros age, they will continue to be on tour because they do have the physical capabilities to do it? Or do you think as they age, they're probably just going to like phase out and just do other things? I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.
Yeah.